60 Minutes with Angela starts right now.
The Executive Vice Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, Babatunde Irukera, joins me on the program today. Start with one of the complaints about your commission, the slow reaction of the commission to complaints from the public. I mean, people saying that they're sending petitions, but they don't receive any response, and sometimes no updates at all. A lot of complaints about time. So people go online, file the complaints, they get the tracking number, but they don't get the feedback from the commission. What is your response to that?
I think generalizing response complaint is not entirely accurate. In the first place, the vast majority of lack of response that we receive as complaints are tweets, and mostly by people who would say, I tagged you on a tweet, or I slid into your DM. First, there are tweets that are addressed to us, and then there are multiple thousand more where we're just tagged. And so our resource allocation, like anybody else, would be to focus on what has come to you. And so if you're complaining to MTN's technical support and tagging us, the first expectation is MTN would sort the problem out. So imagine if we were both opening tickets to fix the same problem. It's not efficient, and we don't have that type of resource. And so significant, by far the vast majority of the feedback we've gotten about people who say, oh, you didn't respond to me, would be that, and we say, how, when did this happen? So, well, I tagged you. And then the next category, I sent you an email. And that email goes to a contact FCCPC email address, which is catch-all. Many people think that is a complaint portal. It's not. It receives all kinds of things, intel, even spam, junk, adverts, all kinds of things. Indeed, you're right that there are a few number of people who would say that even though they went on the appropriate CRM, which is the complaints resolution mechanism on our website or through the app, and say that they haven't received a timely response. And those would be the ones to say that, well, they do have a case ID, it's been ticketed, but they just haven't received the response. The way this thing works is that we're not sitting here and just literally determining what happens in each case. At the end of the day, the real resolutor of a complaint is the provider. And we don't have a warehouse or inventory of the things people are displeased with. And so the first thing is to engage. And what we've done is we engage the providers with the dissatisfaction of a consumer. Many times the provider quickly addresses the issue, agrees on the results. Sometimes the provider even disputes the issue, in which case there's some back and forth before you come to a resolution. And even in that back and forth, sometimes it might resolve in 30 days, some 60. Some haven't resolved in 180 days. Some haven't resolved in 9 months. And the reality and the truth is some will simply not resolve administratively. And so there are different buckets for that. Another reason sometimes for the delay is complaint resolution platform is something we created ourselves at our own cost. And over the years of using it, we've been able to onboard many companies. So the usual suspects are all onboarded, meaning that we give them a spur for them to plug in. For the companies that are on the platform, when the complaints come, we're able to quickly push out to them and say, we're waiting your response on this, and we're able to monitor that. But some of the complaints are against companies that are not on the platform. And so we're going to have to manually write the snail mail, use a courier to send it to them. They would manually respond. And so that takes time. And for those ones that are not on the platform, we don't have full visibility other than manual follow-up. For the ones on the platform, we have a dashboard. And so we can see what's going on and we can intervene if we think it's taking time, or we can take it over by ourselves. And so for the ones that are not, we just have to keep engaging. And you might ask, and in that case, why don't you have all the companies? It's not practicable to have all the companies.
Can you mandate companies to join the platform because it's a consumer issue?
We will get there, but it's also a tricky issue because there's a cost associated not to us, but to the company. Some of the companies are in business, they're small businesses, they don't have that whole infrastructure or technological apparatus to even be able to plug in to a system where the integration would work. And so it will take time for us to be able to get to a point where we can mandate companies of a certain cadre. Because what we want is to impose an obligation on companies to resolve the complaints, not impose an additional cost, which could end up hitting the consumers in prices also. And so it's very tricky, and we're managing it the best way we can, but we're monitoring it very closely to see how to use a regulatory framework to guide, even if not compel, more companies to be onboarded on the system. And to onboard more and more companies also is a cost implication for us, because there's a scaling up, and we have to continue to allocate resources to expanding the technology to scale up for the sheer traffic that comes with that.
All right, so I'm taking you back now to July this year, 2023. The elevator malfunction at a general hospital in Lagos, which resulted in a downward crash and the death of a female doctor who was undergoing, I understand, housemanship. What is your commission doing about that? You know, it's very worrisome that it appears that when events like this happen, we never really see the conclusion or the completion. You know, is it possible that your commission can hold someone responsible for that incident?
The nature of our work sometimes is catalyzing others to do things or improve systems or processes. So it's not every investigation that means there's a bunch of documents, a stack of information coming to the FCCPC, people sitting in hearings. Sometimes our investigation is just to even look at processes and assist other entities, especially government bodies, to optimize their own oversight. And for instance, in the example you make, we issued a joint statement with LASCOPA, which is the Lagos State Consumer Protection Agency. It would be duplicitous for us to keep an open file when we have a sister agency in the state working on it. And the state itself, including the governor, immediately took control of the process, identified the company, blacklisted the company, consequences for even the internal folks who are supposed to be responsible for monitoring. And so our role is to make sure that is happening and to monitor how that ends, to see if new SOPs with respect to, for instance, elevator installers and elevator maintenance and periodic checks. And so our own quality control of that is when I'm in Lagos, if I'm in an elevator, I'm looking at the elevator to see if there's now a sign that says last service on this day, and when the next service is. So that's our own surveillance to make sure that we're protecting people through the work of others. We've seen some process modifications that Lagos State has initiated, including transferring some of the responsibilities into a more integrated system where a facility manager is responsible to the installers and outside contractors are now responsible to a resident facility manager for public offices where you have things like elevators or other equipment that are supposed to ease the life of consumers, but they can also potentially be dangerous.
Because it's very scary. You know, in most of the hospitals, For instance, after surgery, people are moved through the elevators from theatre down to the wards.
Yes.
And I can't even begin to fathom if that sort of thing happens with, someone coming out of surgery.
I think that was an extremely unfortunate accident, and it's one of those accidents where globally was needless and avoidable. Nigeria not being an exclusion, but we should be grateful that there were not many fatalities at the end of the day. Very sad loss to the country, to the family, to the government of Lagos State. But we should still be grateful.
Will anyone be held accountable?
Well, there's already an accountability framework that has kicked in. For instance, that business is not going to be able to do that type of work for perhaps an important client.
Yes.
And that blacklisting for any responsible private business would obviously be concerned.
Yes.
I mean, if I were a large building contractor and I have a contract to build a high-rise, I'll be very concerned about engaging that particular contractor to install the elevator. So there are already consequences. With respect to remedies for the injury sustained, the FCCPC is not the only, in fact, perhaps not even the primary mechanism for those types of remedies. There's tort law, there's right to sue. We have an equivalent agency in Lagos State that is seized with that. And so our role here now is monitoring. And in the event that a resolution at the administrative level is unsatisfactory to a party, maybe the family of the deceased doctor, if they come to the FCCPC, we'd see there's still an administrative role we can play in ensuring a fair outcome. And of course, there's still the court system, which I believe is still the final arbiter anyway.
So we move now to the Federal Capital Territory, where we are in Tama General Hospital. The Commission has begun a probe of the hospital for allegedly rejecting a lady who needed medical intervention after an incident where I think she was thrown out of a moving bus. They say that they rejected her for treatment at the hospital, resulting in loss of life. What are the salient facts that you can share with us regarding that case?
What we know so far from the information we've gathered is Miss Greatness Olorun Femi, who was a victim of criminal conduct. She is otherwise known as One Chance. We've seen evidence that she was, first of all, physically assaulted. The evidence of physical injury on her body, and she also sustained additional physical injury when she was purportedly thrown out of a moving vehicle. I think that those facts are well established. There is evidence that she was transported by Good Samaritans to the Maitama District Hospital, which is a public institution. There's evidence that there was some interaction there. And there's evidence that that's where she was declared deceased. There's evidence that the Federal Capital Territory, through the Office of the Secretary for Health and the Environment, got involved very quickly, and there's been some initial investigation based on its oversight and supervision of the public institution. There's evidence that there are others who have gotten involved, including the Leadership Association and the Personnel Management Association that Ms. Oluwafemi belonged to, who have also engaged in some information gathering at Maitama District Hospital. There's evidence that the police has opened an investigation also, and all of this evidence comes together. The mandate secretary for the Federal Capital Territories Secretariat for Health Services and the Environment issued a statement and noting that they were engaging with the FCCPC. We've since discovered that they've opened up a probe and there's a panel, and the FCCPC will be participating on that panel. We understand that there's been some discussion about an autopsy and then coroner's inquest. The FCCPC will participate in all of that. And so there's some leadership for key elements of all the relevant issues with respect to this incident. And so what the FCCPC will be doing is participating in all of this to ensure that, one, the key responsibilities of each of the entities conducting those investigations, they follow through that. And then secondly, what are really the key mandate and responsibilities from an FCCPC standpoint that might not be the subject of responsibility by those other entities. We bring it to that table to make sure that ultimately it's a very robust investigation and all the issues are addressed. It serves no purpose for multiple investigations to be going except in some very limited circumstances. This doesn't present one of those circumstances in our opinion with what we've seen. But if for any reason the totality of an existing investigation and in terms of reference will not sufficiently address what is important to us, we will do a different investigation, which will at best be supplementary. But the fact that we will be participating in an investigation is already sufficient evidence that what is important to us will be addressed in that investigation.
That brings me to the main point for the question, which I would like you to clarify. Is there any law that prevents a suspect or an accused person from receiving medical treatment even if he or she is a suspect in an armed robbery case?
Absolutely. There's a Victims of Crimes Act that was passed in 2017. The Healthcare Act states that, and in addition to hard law, which is this pieces of legislation, there are all kinds of protocols, including the Patient's Bill of Rights, which is something that was created by the FCCPC in collaboration with many stakeholders, professional associations in healthcare, the Ministry of Health, and it clearly states that. And the Patient's Bill of Health is something that has been domesticated in many hospitals across the country and was adopted by the federal government. And so there are more than enough instruments to hold anybody accountable, to at least make it abundantly clear that the requirement for emergency medical intervention is superior to any law enforcement investigation into the circumstances that led to injury. Even when it's a perpetrator of a crime that is brought to a hospital, there is an obligation for emergency intervention to save lives.
Because you really want to treat the perpetrator so that he can be punished later on. I mean, there's this perception that because he's an armed robber, he doesn't deserve treatment. I don't know if that's the perception you get too from what we read in the papers.
First, having a perpetrator alive is an important aspect of credible and successful investigation. And secondly, as a matter of law, you don't know for sure what bucket that person who's been injured would fall into. I mean, determining that someone committed a crime is a legal conclusion that follows very, for non-lawyers, a complicated, pretty broad process.
Yes.
And so you must proceed from that assumption that somebody is injured. We do not know for sure what the criminal status would ultimately be or not. And so everybody deserves emergency medical attention.
Join us again after the break. Welcome back. And I'm glad you mentioned the Patient's Bill of Rights. What should every Nigerian know about this bill?
Well, every Nigerian should know that all the rights iterated in the Patient's Bill of Rights are an obligation that is owed between the patient and healthcare facilities. And that the Patient's Bill of Rights is not just one document that spells out the obligations both ways, but it's an aggregation. So at itself, it identifies the parameters of the interactions between healthcare providers and the patients, but it also is an aggregation. Each of those rights there, it's aggregation of each right that exists in other instruments, whether ethical codes, law, decided cases, legislation, subsidiary legislation or regulations. So it's not aspirational. It's not CSR. It's not a corporate social responsibility. It's mandatory obligations. However, the Patient's Bill of Rights also has some obligations for patients and their families also. Some of the experiences healthcare providers have had with respect to injury and even their own security in the place of work has been aggression or violence by patients or their families. And so there are obligations for patients and users of the families also in the Patient's Bill of Rights. And even though there are rights that say that emergency intervention must be provided without delay, there are also obligations on the patients that as soon as possible make arrangements to pay for the care you have received. So the Patient Bill of Rights is actually a balanced aggregation that secures patients, other users, their families, healthcare workers, for instance, even visitation rights. Because how one patient or families or friends of one patient behaves could impact the security, the safety, the satisfaction, the peace, and the comfort of another patient. And so all of these things come in the illustrated version of the Patient's Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights is displayed in the hospitals that have domesticated it.
Yes.
Will it be mandatory for every hospital, whether private or public, to domesticate this bill?
It is not mandatory at this point.
Yes.
There are many competing interests and questions, legal, some of them, on whether you can make that mandatory, including the nature of government, the dichotomy between state and federal government, and what the constitutional provisions are about the role of the state, the local government, and the federal government, and what it can mandate and not mandate. But I think the traction that domestication is gaining would lead us to a point where we can build consensus between the federal, the state, and the local government, where we might be able to have some guidance that cascades all the way down to make it more compelling that the vast majority of healthcare facilities have it. One of the things we've discovered with the Patient Bill of Rights is that what we're now doing with domestication is that wherever we go for domestication, we go with a team. So the domestication is not just a ribbon or tape cutting event, it's now a training event. Because we're discovering that sometimes some people in the healthcare providing side are learning of these rights at the same time the patients are learning. And I'm not necessarily talking about the physicians, but other people who are in that value chain. The security personnel, and there are all kinds, even other types of healthcare professionals who their roles are critical to the fullest respect for the rights of a patient who are not aware of those rights.
I want to talk about loan applications now, and the Commission banning some and approving some. I was surprised to find that over 154 companies have been granted full approval. That's what it says on your website, which tells me that, is it that some may have provisional approval? Are there some with provisional and some with full? And what's the difference?
And so some apps are approved conditionally because they've complied with all the requirements as a matter of principle, but awaiting other approvals from other regulatory authorities, which is more a matter of administrative. So for instance, if your software has been analyzed and the security is fine, but you are awaiting the administrative write-up of that, and we have that evidence from the other regulator, then you have a conditional approval. And so to the extent anything that is not necessarily within the control of the applicant, if they've done everything within their control to be able to operate safely, then they could secure a conditional approval. Otherwise, full approval means everything has been checked out. Now, our approval is not a license as sector regulators issue licenses. So it's not a license like NCC would issue a license to telecommunications companies, or CBN will issue a license to banks, or NERC issue a license to electricity companies, or NCA to airlines. Our approval is to check certain elements or parameters of consumer protection. One, that you have a policy that prohibits inappropriate loan recovery or balance repayment methods, which is critical, and that you have a framework, a feedback framework for your customers to even reach you and dispute whether it's a loan balance or whatever. Two, that the technology you're using now prohibits access to people's private information. Three, that the data management regulator is satisfied with your data policies, your storage mechanisms, your gathering mechanism, and your policy with respect to sharing and transfer. So that's not anything we do. You get that satisfaction from the Nigerian Data Protection Commission. Your software is not something we look at. That's for NIDA to look at. Then you assure us that you do not compound interest. Now, with respect to the interest on your loan, we're not a prudential regulator. Yes. We do not have the expertise to manage interest rates. And so, essentially what we're saying is that the basic principles of fairness and ethics in lending, you've either made declarations to comply with that, or you've shown us material that shows you intend to comply with that. That's what our approval process is. And so people erroneously think that we have now become the regulator of the interest rates, the technology. No, we can't do that.
So since the Commission stepped in, has the Commission received reports of any more incidents of, those phone calls they make to friends of the person who lent money?
Yes. Now, I would say that that is probably from the successive interventions starting, I want to say that was last year or maybe end of 2021 when we opened the investigation. Between then and now, I'd say this is reduced easily up to 90%. But there's still a 10% out there that we're battling and trying to resolve. I mean, it rose again about June, July, and then we engaged again and developed additional regulatory tools.
Yes. What caused it to rise again?
Several things. One of the things that the macroeconomic factors always increase borrowing, and so the very important policies that the government had to implement to rescue and even strengthen the economy, which the government has repeatedly said it recognizes, are hard decisions, had downstream effect on cash flow. So either it's a removal of subsidy or a closing of the multiple foreign exchange windows. They have downstream impact on disposable income. And so whenever disposable income becomes impacted, people are likely to borrow more. And then there was also what I think rogue businesses who had started figuring ways to get around the new regulatory framework. And that's globally typical. Over a period of time, rogue businesses will find the gaps in the regulatory framework. And what the regulator must do is also step up and plug those gaps. And so between now we've been able to plug more gaps. We've seen a reduction. We continue to work to keep reducing this.
I'm sure advocacy is one of the things that the Commission does. And that's what brings me to this topic now of the tomato mix matter. It would seem to me that there is a lacuna. Retailers who think that they're doing the consumer a favor and that you ought to be grateful that they're manufacturing anything at all. And then buyers who think that the customer is always right, irrespective of the unreasonableness of their demands or whatever. How can we reconcile these two positions?
I think the dynamics of managing a successful, profitable, enduring, and most importantly, responsible business actually address the different pieces of what you've said. Now, the customer is not always right, but is king. And so when you say the customer is king, it's more about how you treat the customer. It's not about taking the validity of what the customer says as correct. I mean, if someone says to me, adding 5 and 5 is 11, it doesn't matter what they're buying. That doesn't make it right. But if someone who I should defer to says to me, adding 5 and 5 is 11, there is a method in which I will approach the engagement. And so that's when I say the customer is king. It's about how you treat people. It's not about taking their word for value.
Yes.
That's a very important differentiation. And you're right. I think successive years of military rule has affected the mindset of people. And so it's not even just in retail. Generally, people who are paid to perform a service, even in government, feel that what they have is power.
Yes.
And so how they exercise that power, even for the benefit of the beneficiaries or the focus of the power, is a matter of benevolence for them. And that's not the case. I mean, any business that sells anything, the purpose of that business is created to sell that thing. If people don't buy it, there's no need for that business. And so for any business that does that, to conceptually in any way consider itself as doing a favor to the consumers hasn't passed the test that I said for a business to be profitable and enduring. It must be responsible. And if the business is irresponsible, it's only a question of time. It may be sooner, it may be later. It cannot endure. It just cannot endure. And consumers must have the liberty for feedback.
So it is not against the law for a consumer to give a review of a product that they've purchased.
Not only is it not against the law, businesses and we regulators beg, beyond encourage, consumers to provide that feedback. I traveled and arrived last week. I've gotten one email from the hotel I stayed and multiple emails for the different segments of my travel from the airline asking me to review my experience. That feedback is one of the most important components of any robust consumer protection or rights enforcement framework. And so, regulator, not only do we encourage it, we must protect that channel. Consumers must feel comfortable. And that's the reason why we responded strongly that this could potentially chill the channel or diminish the channel or that platform. Secondly, it's important to businesses and to us as a regulator because that's where products come from. That's product development comes from feedback. Product modification and improvement comes from feedback. We as regulators have an interest in making sure product continues to be developed or improved for the satisfaction of consumers because that's our business, right?
Yes.
Okay. And safety, all of that comes from that. And so it is one of the most important things, and businesses need it also. Regulators need it, businesses need it, consumers need it. And consumers need to help each other by reviewing products so that they can drive traffic to the good products so the products that are not good can get better. That's really how it's a complete ecosystem where review is at the heart of it. And so not only must we encourage it, we owe an obligation to protect it.
I'm so happy you said that because many people are confused about the role of the police in arresting someone who reviewed a product. I mean, when it's not a criminal case, and I know because you're a lawyer, you will understand what I'm saying. A person reviews something on social media and then the police are invited and the person is whisked away. Are there any remedies available to the reviewer who was so arrested?
I think we're not addressing the fundamentals of how society operates. I say this not now as a consumer protection regulator, as a lawyer and a litigator prior to this role. There is a tort which is recognized as malicious prosecution.
Yes.
Okay. Now, malicious prosecution means something that's completely baseless. Now, malicious prosecution doesn't start and end with the fact that I've been charged to court and it turned out to be baseless or malicious.
Yeah.
Now, malicious prosecution is not that you were tried in court and the court found the charges baseless or unsupported by evidence. No. Malicious prosecution is a specific determination or specific combination of facts that shows that this was pointless from day one. Now, the value chain of that doesn't start with whether somebody propounded a charge against you or not. Because at the end of the day, there's prosecutorial discretion and there's prosecutorial immunity for propounding charges when you believe that there's sufficient evidence. Now, the police are victims also in a society where we as citizens can act anyhow. If you can move the hand of the police by spurious, inappropriate allegations, then you are as much part of the problem as what people allege the police is. And there have been cases like that. I remember there was a case in the US for many years of some woman who drove her children into a pond and they died. And blamed it on someone else. And because this person had a record of crime, and just look at the sheer number of cases and the number of people who have been removed from death row because somebody lied. And somebody who's come back and said, yeah, you know what, I lied. That's where malicious prosecution started. And you can say the police acted irresponsibly, but the reality is they were triggered by somebody else's conduct. Now, does this mean that citizens, including brand owners, cannot report a matter to the police? No, it doesn't. But there must be subjective, true belief that criminal conduct has occurred. Now, I say subjective because what you think may be different from what I think.
Yes.
But even your subjective concern about criminal conduct occurring must be subjected to an objective standard. And is that objective standard that we would use to determine if this was a sensible alarm or a false alarm, or if you were just trying to suppress dissent or opinion, which are constitutional guarantees anyway. And so that's what we got involved in with respect to the tomato mix.
You were very quick to get involved. I read how quickly you moved to the police station to see or meet with the lady in question, to see what was happening. So what was the result of your involvement?
And so what we did was to immediately send a team to the police station, and she wasn't there, but we understood she was en route to Abuja. And so we opened a communication channel with the force headquarters, and in 24 hours, I think we must have even sent maybe 2 pieces of written correspondence. I spoke with the Commissioner of Police in Lagos. I spoke with the Principal Staff Officer of the Inspector General of Police and continued the engagement. And for us, it wasn't about whether something had gone wrong or not. It wasn't about whether her post was fair comment or not.
Yes.
It was about all the information we had satisfies us sufficiently that this wasn't criminal conduct. And the fact that it wasn't criminal conduct doesn't mean that the manufacturer would not have any remedies in the event that this was inappropriate conduct.
Yes.
But it certainly was, we just didn't think that this was something that should end up in detention or prosecution. And so that was our own engagement, and we're grateful that at the end of the day, between that and other interventions, she was released from custody.
Do you think that her apology was appropriate? Do you think perhaps she apologized under duress?
Now, so I can't say, we don't have the information. They would be coming in. When I say they, her lawyer has expressed that he would be representing her as part of our own investigation about what she said.
Yes.
Because even she is a subject of investigation based on what she said.
Yes.
So I can't say that yet, but it's something that we would ask her questions about. Not that that's that important to our regulatory intervention, but it's an important finding for us to be able to provide feedback to law enforcement authorities about securing the space, but I can tell you something basically as a lawyer, that a negative review of a product, and especially when you attribute it to your own personal experience, means it's your opinion. Now, I would have said my first thing would have been her opinion was not factual if she was saying that there was any property or ingredient in the product that didn't exist. That didn't exist. Well, it's not even about whether it ought not to be there or not.
Yes.
And so, for instance, if she said, well, she says, look, there's sugar in this product. Question is there sugar or not? If it turns out that there's absolutely no sugar in that product, then her allegation is baseless.
Yes.
But
if there's
sugar, and so a baseline fact. The next thing she says is it's too much. Now that's subjective. It might be too much for me and not too much for you. So it's difficult for that to ultimately become criminal conduct. But it might still be unfair or inappropriate. And so one of the things we did was to start polls and focus groups to gather information about people's opinion about the product and how they characterize the product, their views or expressions about whether there's sugar in it or how much sugar in it will form part of the objective standard by which we test her subjective opinion. And that's how the process would work. And it will end with a finding. Suffice to say, though, that to the extent that her criticism was about a product, it would be difficult to sustain a criminal defamation allegation. Because in criminal defamation, it must be the reputation of an individual. It must be a real victim, not a victim that's a brand. I mean, of course, the brand owner and all of that and the company are victims, but the law, defamation about the reputation of the company is a civil issue. It's not going to be criminal at all.
Join us again after the break. Welcome back to my concluding moments now with Babatunde Irukera. Does it make any difference that NAFDAC has actually come out to say that even though there's sugar in the product, it's not harmful? In fact, it's quite normal to have sugar as a preservative in some of these products.
Very good. Now, my worry with that is that I think NAFDAC has done the absolute right thing. And I don't think NAFDAC did it to defend a company.
No.
I think NAFDAC did it because it was important for consumers to know, and it could be misleading, people could be afraid, and to also validate this particular product that, listen guys, for those of you who are patrons of this product, don't be afraid. You're not consuming some dangerous product, and the manufacturer of this product is not engaging in illegal conduct. That was a very important message NAFDAC had to pass to both the patrons of the product and the rest of the community or society that use tomato mix. So that was an important thing. Put differently, what that also does is that it diminishes the case that the commenter's review was spurious allegation, because it validates the fact that there is sugar in the product.
Yes. All right, so the issue of tickets and trains and so many sharp practices going on. There are incidents now where people want to board the train, and when they seek tickets, they will say there are no tickets available. But you have members of the train, the staff at the railways now taking people in to the coaches and say, oh, come with me, I'll get you tickets. And then when they get there, the train starts to move, and then the staff are collecting cash from them. So, I was following this thread on my friend Shola Salako's page, and someone said, why would anyone want to pay cash well, the train has moved from the station. You feel obliged to pay. You don't want to be a troublemaker. You are there. You understand? So, what can people do about that?
I saw that for the first time, and what I did was to immediately contact the Minister of Transportation, who oversees the Nigerian Railway Corporation, and then we're engaging already. I'm very grateful that he has even already said that he actually is on it. He responded to me and says, we're on this. And in our usual role, what we will do is, once we've catalyzed action by a more focal regulator or solution provider, we just remain oversight to monitor and see the outcome. So we look to see how this plays out.
And the thing is, it would appear to me, and I'm trying to find the right words, sometimes when government brings these ways that things can improve, especially now that we're going more digital, go online and register, go online and do something, there's a resistance from the people who run the agencies. It's like they don't want these improvements because it reduces physical engagement, interaction with the potential clients.
Which promotes graft.
Yes, thereby limiting options and opportunities for graft. What is the way forward? Because they tell you go online and register. You find that you can never register. But when you get to the office, outside these offices, you see people there with laptops and you're able to register. And this is across board. Whether you're registering for NYC, you're registering for anything, it's always so difficult to access the website. But the people who run these things are still thriving on this physical interaction.
Technology is a disruptor, and we also have to, in seeking solutions, as citizens, we must seek solutions that are sustainable. For instance, where technology fails, what we should be looking for is how to make the technology work, not to return to the old alternative that didn't work. I remember very, very many years ago in the UK, when they were transitioning from the manual entry into the trains and the undergrounds, people used to jump over the turnstiles and everything. Now it can't happen anymore. It's a sustained, tedious, but very pedantic and stubborn approach till technology ultimately eliminates the room for those interactions that promote craft. And we're on the cusp of it rather late, so we're experiencing the associated teething problems as we must.
Yes.
What government and regulators must do is just remain determined, and what citizens must do is to understand that there are bad elements everywhere, whether in government or on the streets. There are bad elements everywhere, and those bad elements, who are sometimes not state actors, in fact just private actors also, will always seek to frustrate a system. But if we allow that to happen, that system won't sustain. And one of the threads I read, you had someone who insisted that no, I want to go and get a ticket. I don't want to approach the train through an entrance that is not. But of course, ultimately run into trouble. So that continuing insistence. Or if I were on that train, for instance, I would have declined to pay by cash if I have a card. So, you know what? If for any reason you put me on this train and you're going to take it off and you wanted me to pay on the train, you should have had a POS.
Right.
You should have an equipment that allows me to pay cashless. And when they put it in and the receipt comes out, look at the name on the receipt. If it says Babatunde, Irukera and Co. Wait a minute, you can't take this away. This doesn't show that I've paid to the Railway Corporation.
Yes.
And so all of the policemen in Nigeria are what? How many thousand? There are 200 million of us. We must police ourselves too.
There is a tendency for people to view you as a troublemaker? You know, you're at the airport and everyone's queuing, and then someone comes and the airport staff are taking them to the front, and then you start to talk about it, and everyone initially looks at you. Sometimes, when someone starts to react, then everyone joins in. But generally speaking, people look at you as the troublemaker. Are you not a Nigerian kind of thing?
And so a troublemaker you are. We must have a few troublemakers in any society. I mean, I'm considered a nuisance. I'm considered a troublemaker, a nuisance, an interloper, minding other people's business. What's the greatest criticism about Irukera? I would always, he goes beyond his mandate. Even what is not his business, he gets into it. So what? And so what? I mean, and many times, just making that trouble doesn't matter that you resolve that situation. It's also an advocacy tool. It also lets others, many times some people just don't even know. Many times those who say, look, aren't you a Nigerian, feel that, look, let's not run the boat because we don't have these rights.
Yes.
And so what you're doing each time you're making trouble is also sensitization.
Educating people.
Secondly, many times people have said to me that they've written to a company or an electronic store and written them a letter saying, I bought this washing machine from you, I bought this television, it's not working, I've been trying to get you to fix it, you haven't fixed it. And FCCPC, they get a call. They have not even sent out the copy. Yeah. No, they just copied me on the letter, they haven't even sent out the copy to me.
To you, okay.
Yet somebody sees it and says, oh no, why, it's no big deal, let's sort this out. And so, at the end of the day, we succeed when things go right, not when we resolve everything. And that's where we must head. We would never be able to hold every single person accountable. That's what an accountability framework is. The best framework is where everyone says, I do not want to even have to deal with this, so I'd rather not. And so making that trouble, somebody else is watching, just says, no, I'm not going to get involved in this. I mean, I've been at the airport where passengers were getting on rowdy and unruly with an airline operative because of a delay, and somebody sitting at the counter of the other airline goes to announce our own flight is going to be delayed also, and this is the reason, because they didn't want their own passengers to come and get rowdy. So say, look, let's just go make an announcement now.
Let them know.
Let them know. And so we're modifying behavior. I just believe that if what we consider making trouble is speaking up, but not violating the law, becoming disruptive, then it's a good thing to speak up.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Irukera, for spending time with me today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I'm Angela Ajetunmobi.